There is a moment in every war when a soldier realizes that courage alone will not decide the outcome. A quiet awakening that strategy, logistics, and forces beyond the battlefield shape events in ways no individual bravery can influence. For thousands of German soldiers captured during the Second World War, that awakening did not come under the roar of artillery or amidst frozen retreats, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, as they crossed the Atlantic, approaching a coastline they've been taught their entire lives to fear and underestimate. By 1943, the tide of war had begun to shift. German troops still fought with discipline across multiple fronts, but their victories were no longer swift or decisive. Defensive lines stretched thin, and Allied bombing campaigns relentlessly targeted German industrial centers, forcing factories underground or into constant repair. Civilians adapted to the unending sirens. Rationing tightened, and substitutes replaced familiar staples. Yet many soldiers clung to a deep-seated belief in their nation's eventual technological edge and resilience, convinced that the United States, wealthy but supposedly soft, lacked the endurance for total war. Years of propaganda had carefully constructed this perception, portraying American society as divided, indulgent, and incapable of prolonged sacrifice, relying on material abundance rather than skill. When capture finally came, whether in North Africa, Italy, or Western Europe, these prisoners expected harsh treatment at the hands of an enemy they had been taught to despise. But the first surprise came not in the camps, but at sea. Transport ships departed quietly from European ports, threading through waters still hunted by submarines. Conditions aboard were controlled and orderly. Guards maintained discipline. Yet what unsettled the prisoners most was not firmness but consistency. Meals arrived on schedule, medical care was offered without discrimination, and wounded German soldiers received treatment alongside Allied injured. Some suspected it was temporary, a calculated strategy to maintain order, but few understood that it signaled something far deeper. Days at sea passed. Conversations repeated old rumors. True imprisonment would begin on land. Forced labor awaited, isolation loomed. But the Atlantic itself became a threshold, a journey not only across water, but across the boundaries of expectation. Land finally appeared on the horizon, and with it, a clarity that would haunt many German soldiers long after the war ended. Harbors gradually emerged from the morning haze, industrial cranes stretching high, cargo moving with practiced efficiency, trains arriving and departing in seamless rhythm. Smoke rose steadily from factory stacks, not from destruction, but from production uninterrupted. Germany had fought admirably under bombardment, dispersing facilities and innovating under constant threat. Yet what these prisoners witnessed seemed fundamentally different. In America, industry did not merely endure, it expanded. Buildings remained intact. Infrastructure appeared abundant and redundant, prepared not for commerce alone but for sustained mobilization. The soldiers braced for the same chaos, for the scarcity and improvisation that defined wartime Europe, only to find organized order at every turn. Disembarkation followed strict protocol. Prisoners were grouped under military police supervision and escorted to waiting trains, anticipating the cramped, harsh transport common across Europe. Instead, they found passenger coaches stocked with water and provisions, medical staff checking lingering injuries, and windows open to sunlight. The journey inland revealed landscapes untouched by war. Towns passed in orderly calm, farms stretched outward in geometric precision, and automobiles traveled smooth, uninterrupted roads. Children waved at trains, lights illuminated streets without blackout restrictions, and for men accustomed to darkness and constant air raid warnings, the sight was surreal. They began to grasp gradually that the society did not live under perpetual threat. Railroads, bridges, and water towers functioned with reliability. Grain silos stood full, and the rhythm of daily life continued undisturbed by the violence consuming Europe. The psychological impact was profound. Expecting humiliation layered atop defeat, they instead encountered a nation whose daily routines radiated confidence and stability. Upon arrival at prisoner of war camps scattered across the United States, they faced another adjustment. Camps were secure, fenced, and monitored, yet they resembled organized military installations more than makeshift prisons. Barracks stood in neat rows, kitchens operated methodically, and medical facilities were fully staffed. Discipline was firm and escape was impossible, but there was no chaotic overcrowding, no neglect. The Geneva Convention ensured rations comparable to those of American soldiers. Bread was fresh, meat portions consistent, coffee authentic. Suspicion lingered at first. Some prisoners assumed generosity masked ulterior motives, but the routines persisted. Roll calls at dawn, meals on schedule, medical attention without delay. Letters home were permitted, recreation modest but functional. Through the stable rhythm, the first cracks appeared in deeply held beliefs. The United States was not disorderly. It was organized at scale, with ports, railways, towns, and camps functioning with precision and efficiency far beyond what German soldiers had been taught to expect from a society reliant on comfort rather than discipline. As the early weeks of captivity progressed, another realization began to emerge. The United States was mobilizing for war not through desperation, but with quiet coordination, its internal systems operating without interruption while projecting power globally. Prisoners witnessed agriculture, timber, and food processing labor, all conducted under supervision, but with efficiency and care, not cruelty. Fields stretched endlessly, orchards flourished, and industrial work progressed without pause. Even routine tasks demonstrated strategic depth. Trains delivered crops to processing centers, warehouses stocked supplies for overseas shipment. Factories produced vehicles, aircraft, and munitions at accelerating rates. The soldiers began to recognize a form of strength they had never encountered, endurance built on infrastructure, organization, and consistency, rather than the courage and discipline of men in battle alone. Their prior assumptions about American weakness began to falter as exposure to uninterrupted production, coordinated logistics, and calm civilian life quietly reshaped their understanding of what total war demanded. By the end of those first months, doubt had taken root. Many prisoners still clung to loyalty for their homeland, spoke with pride of German engineering and tactics, yet the evidence before them was undeniable. The scale and continuity of American effort, the abundant yet controlled resources, and the calm resilience of civilian society suggested a strategic capacity far beyond what they had been taught to expect. Time, they realized, could be as decisive as courage. Wars of attrition favored those who could replace losses, sustain production, and maintain social order under pressure. America was doing all of this, expanding, not merely enduring. For the first time, many German soldiers confronted the uncomfortable truth that victory might not be determined solely by battlefield heroism, but by the patient, systematic operation of an entire nation far from destruction. And in that quiet awakening, the seeds of internal reckoning were planted. Fragile yet persistent, destined to grow as their captivity continued. As weeks turned into months, the routines of captivity became almost second nature to the German prisoners, yet with each passing day, the subtle realization of America's extraordinary capacity continued to grow. Work assignments expanded beyond initial agricultural labor. Some prisoners found themselves in lumber camps, felling timber essential for construction and infrastructure. Others were sent to food processing plants, packaging crops for distribution, while still others assisted with road maintenance or organized warehouses. Every task, however ordinary it seemed, reinforced a pattern. This was not a nation scrambling to survive, but one whose machinery of war and life operated seamlessly, even under extraordinary global strain. Guards remained vigilant, rifles visible, authority firm. But there was no malice in labor, no unnecessary cruelty, and often no words at all beyond practical instructions. Translation or gesture sufficed. The work itself became a lens through which prisoners began to grasp the true scale of the American war effort. Fields stretched for miles, factories hummed, and rail lines carried goods with unerring reliability. This quiet, relentless order began to unsettle them more profoundly than any act of combat ever could. In the early mornings, trucks would assemble outside the camp gates, engines idling in cool, pre-dawn air. Prisoners climbed in under the watchful eyes of armed guards, traveling to assignments that seemed mundane, but were integral to sustaining a nation at war. For many, these journeys offered glimpses into a reality that defied expectation. The Midwest presented vast wheat fields, rolling in gentle waves toward distant horizons. Corn stretched in endless geometric rows. Cotton in the South required meticulous care. Orchards in the West spread across valleys, their branches laden with fruit untouched by bombs or bullets. Unlike Europe, where centuries of villages and small plots defined the landscape, The scale of America's land seemed almost incomprehensible. Space appeared inexhaustible, abundance natural. Farmers greeted these labor crews with caution, a reminder that even amidst war, trust was earned slowly. Yet necessity prevailed. Crops would not harvest themselves, livestock required attention, and the work continued under calm but firm supervision. Food, once again, became a silent indicator of difference. Lunches were delivered midday, sometimes prepared by local families, sometimes transported from camp kitchens. Fresh vegetables accompanied bread baked recently, and meat portions, though modest, remained steady. Bottled soft drinks, once a rare curiosity, were occasionally distributed to labor crews. For prisoners accustomed to substitutes and scarcity back home, these small comforts carried weight far beyond their immediate utility. They represented stability, abundance, and a society that could sustain both civilian life and military expansion simultaneously. And above all, they reflected a reality of war vastly different from the propaganda-fed image that had shaped the soldiers' perception of the United States. Not a fragile, indulgent enemy relying on spectacle, but a nation systematically organized to endure and expand its capacity in the face of global conflict. As prisoners worked, they observed civilian life in ways that were quietly transformative. Women operated machinery in factories, their movements confident and precise, contributing directly to the nation's mobilization. Teenagers delivered newspapers while attending school. Children played openly in towns, and communities organized dances, church events, and other social gatherings even as war raged thousands of miles away. There was no panic, no visible strain, no desperation etched in the fabric of daily life. Lights illuminated streets in the evenings. Shop windows displayed products in careful order. Bakeries offered racks of fresh bread, and grocery shelves were stocked with flour, sugar, canned vegetables, and preserved meats. Even though rationing existed, it was controlled and measured, not crippling. The contrast to European life was stark. In Germany, civilians contended with blackout curtains, air raid sirens, synthetic substitutes, and persistent fear overhead. Here, the sky remained open, unthreatened. The quiet resilience of civilian routines, combined with visible abundance, gradually challenged long-held assumptions about what it meant to endure total war. Inside the barracks, conversations shifted. Early debates focused on punishment, escape, or potential threats. Later, discussions centered on capacity and endurance. Prisoners compared reports from Europe with what they saw firsthand. Functioning railways, abundant stores, continuous production, and a society operating without visible strain. Some insisted that this calm and plenty were illusions, fragile and temporary, bolstered by distance from European battlefields. Others began to accept a more unsettling truth. America's distance was itself an advantage, its infrastructure vast and protected, its industry capable of replacement and expansion at a pace impossible to match under bombardment. The realization slowly crystallized. In war, endurance and capacity often mattered as much, if not more, than courage or tactical brilliance. Those who could sustain production, feed armies, and maintain societal function held a decisive advantage, and the United States was demonstrating exactly that, quietly, every day. News from Europe arrived in fragments, censored and slow, yet it only reinforced the contrast. Allied landings, gradual advances across France and Italy, and the tightening fronts were weighed against the prisoners' daily observations. While battlefield reversals were debated and loyalty to Germany persisted, the clear pattern of American logistical superiority became undeniable. Time, more than momentary heroics, had become a strategic weapon. The ability to replace losses, sustain operations, and coordinate vast systems of production and distribution defined the war's evolving nature. Soldiers who had once measured strength by divisions and armored columns now face an alternative metric: the quiet, patient, and relentless functioning of an entire nation at scale. Every day in fields, factories, and warehouses demonstrated that victory depended as much on capacity, consistency, and endurance as on skill or bravery on the battlefield. By mid-1944, the prisoners' psychological transformation deepened. They had begun to internalize a truth that propaganda and prior experience had concealed: that a society could maintain civilian normalcy while waging a global war, that abundance and military power were not mutually exclusive. Exposure to this reality eroded rigid narratives. opening a space where doubt could flourish. Some soldiers clung to loyalty and national pride, citing German engineering, tactics, or future technological breakthroughs. Others began to recognize that the United States' enduring capacity might render such arguments increasingly irrelevant. The evidence was constant, cumulative, and difficult to dismiss. Rail lines transported goods seamlessly, warehouses remained stocked, crops were harvested efficiently, and production lines operated with precision. Even ordinary civilian interactions, the measured tone of instructions, the calm diligence of workers, the organization of towns, contributed to a quiet but profound shift in understanding. It was not indoctrination or overt re-education that created this shift. It was exposure. Daily repetition of order, abundance, and continuity challenged assumptions, gradually replacing certainty with reflection and internal reckoning. Ideological conviction, once absolute, began to soften in the face of persistent contradiction. The soldier's worldview had been meticulously constructed to anticipate weakness in the United States. Yet reality proved stubbornly contrary. The patient, coordinated functioning of American society, its infrastructure, and its workforce presented a lesson in strategic endurance far beyond the battlefield, a lesson that unfolded not through explosions or speeches, but through the steady rhythm of normal life under extraordinary circumstances. By the time Allied advances in Europe accelerated, many German prisoners had privately recognized what official reports would later confirm. The imbalance extended beyond immediate military confrontation. It existed in infrastructure, in production, in logistics, in the unbroken flow of life, and worked thousands of miles from combat. The war, they began to understand, could be decided long before armies clashed, through the quiet, deliberate, and sustained capacity to endure. And in recognizing this, the first seeds of doubt, reflection, and internal reckoning took root, marking the beginning of a transformation that would continue far beyond the fences of the camps and the end of global hostilities. As the month of captivity stretched on, the German prisoners found themselves increasingly integrated into the rhythms of American labor, yet the integration was unlike anything they had anticipated. Work assignments grew in complexity and scope, moving beyond the predictable fields and timber camps to industrial and logistical support. Some assisted in food processing plants, packaging agricultural output for nationwide distribution, while others supported road maintenance crews or warehouses essential to wartime supply chains. Every task, no matter how ordinary it seemed, revealed a remarkable consistency in organization and purpose. Guards were present, rifles in hand, a reminder that escape was impossible, yet their role was largely supervisory, rarely interfering in the practicalities of labor. Translation barriers were overcome with gestures or simple explanations, and the prisoners began to realize that the work itself and a methodical approach to it offered a glimpse into a nation's capacity to sustain war on an extraordinary scale. The landscape through which the prisoners traveled was unlike any European soldier had ever experienced. In the Midwest, endless wheat fields rolled toward distant horizons. Precise corn rows seemed to stretch to infinity, and cotton in southern states required careful harvesting under expansive open skies. Western orchards, lush and unscarred, carried fruit on branches untouched by artillery or aerial bombardment. The sheer size and order of American agriculture challenged European understanding of scarcity and wartime adaptation. In Germany, centuries-old villages pressed tightly against the surrounding land. Plots of farms were small, and every acre was accounted for with precision. In contrast, American fields seemed inexhaustible, stretching outward with a natural abundance that suggested both wealth and foresight. Farmers greeted these foreign laborers with caution, mindful that their sons might be fighting abroad. Yet the work demanded collaboration, and over time necessity overcame initial mistrust. Every detail reinforced the prisoners' growing awareness of society operating under extraordinary efficiency. Meals provided during work breaks were modest yet consistent. Bread, fresh vegetables, and portions of meat served reliably, with bottled soft drinks on occasion. Guards and supervisors treated the laborers with measured fairness. There was no visible malice, no humiliation, only the rhythm of repeated tasks executed with purpose. These experiences began to erode long-held assumptions. For years, propaganda had painted Americans as indulgent, fragile, and incapable of sustained effort under pressure. Yet these prisoners observed precisely the opposite. Coordinated, patient, and deliberate work carried out with remarkable consistency, an unspoken testimony to both discipline and strategic design. Daily life in nearby towns further challenged preconceived notions. Civilians moved through their routines with quiet confidence. Women operated factory machinery with skill and authority. Teenagers balanced school with work responsibilities, and children played freely in the streets. Shops remained well-stocked, with store windows carefully arranged to display bread, sugar, flour, preserved meats, and even radios. Even under rationing, essential goods were present in abundance. Streetlights illuminated towns at night, but there were no blackouts, no sirens, no visible panic. Life continued unbroken. In comparison, European cities have been trained into fear. Blackout curtains, air raid drills, synthetic food substitutes, and scarcity governed daily existence. Yet here, amidst open skies and a rhythm of everyday labor, the prisoners began to understand a startling truth. A society could sustain both the comforts of civilian life and the machinery of war simultaneously, without strain that visibly weakened its structure. Back in the camps, conversations among the prisoners shifted from speculation and rumor toward observation and reflection. Early fears of mistreatment or hidden threats gave way to debates over capacity and endurance. Some clung to the belief that the calm and abundance of America were illusions, fragile and unsustainable. Others recognized a strategic reality far more unsettling. America's geographic distance provided protection. Its resources were vast, and its infrastructure was both resilient and expansive. The soldiers began to grasp that victory might not rely solely on courage or tactical brilliance in battle, but on sustained organization, logistical precision, and the capacity to endure attrition. Daily exposure to the unbroken rhythm of production and the quiet efficiency of civilian life provided a lesson in strategic patience that no battlefield could convey. As 1944 progressed, these realizations deepened. News from Europe arrived slowly through censored newspapers, yet reinforced the contrast the prisoners observed firsthand. Allied advances across France and Italy, the tightening fronts, and the gradual retreat of German forces were all measured against the continuity of American effort. While some prisoners argued that setbacks were temporary or that German ingenuity would turn the tide, the pattern of American resilience was undeniable. Trains delivered goods with precision, warehouses remained stocked, crops were harvested efficiently, and factories produced vehicles, aircraft, and munitions at accelerating rates. Time itself emerged as a weapon. The ability to replace losses, sustain operations, and maintain societal order became as decisive as any engagement on the battlefield. The prisoners' understanding of war began to shift. They realized that enduring logistical networks, stable production, and societal coordination could determine the outcome even before opposing forces faced each other in combat. The psychological effect of this recognition was subtle but cumulative. In their barracks, the prisoners debated the implications of their observations, weighing loyalty and national pride against the evidence before them. Some clung to the hope that the abundance and calm were illusions, a carefully staged spectacle meant to deceive and demoralize foreign eyes. Others began to acknowledge that the scale of American organization, production, and infrastructure suggested an enduring strategic advantage, one that could not be easily undermined or destroyed. Exposure to this system, day after day, allowed the prisoners to see how war could be waged not through immediate aggression alone, but through sustained, methodical capacity to produce, distribute, and maintain resources. Even mundane moments reinforced the lesson. Supervising guards, overseeing the loading of crops or the movement of supplies, conducted their work with precision and predictability. Civilian workers executed tasks efficiently, demonstrating skill and diligence without visible strain or complaint. These small, repeated exposures carried disproportionate weight in shaping perceptions. Soldiers who had once been taught that victory depended on heroism, discipline, and daring began to recognize another dimension of strength: endurance, order, and the capacity to maintain societal normalcy under the demands of total war. Each passing day solidified the understanding that the American war effort was not improvised. It was deliberate, systematic, and sustainable. Gradually, ideological certainty began to erode. Exposure to abundance, efficiency, and coordination challenged deeply ingrained assumptions about the enemy. Where once propaganda had created caricatures of indulgent, weak Americans, Prisoners now saw organized, capable, and patient citizens contributing to a society capable of sustaining war on multiple fronts. Their prior worldview, crafted from loyalty, fear, and propaganda, began to fracture. Observation replaced speculation. Repetition replaced belief in illusion. The unbroken rhythm of daily life, production, and labor became a subtle yet inexorable teacher, revealing that the capacity to endure, replace, and coordinate might matter far more than courage alone. By the later months of 1944, the prisoners' transformation was profound. While many maintained pride in German engineering, tactics, and ingenuity, the scale and consistency of American effort provided a counterpoint impossible to ignore. Exposure to functioning rail networks, abundant stores, continuous production, and calm, confident civilian life introduced a new understanding of total war. Victory was not determined solely by heroism at the front, but by endurance, infrastructure, and the ability to maintain order across society. Time had emerged as an instrument of strategic power, and the United States had mastered its use. For the first time, German prisoners began to confront the uncomfortable truth that success in war depended not only on courage and discipline, but on patient, relentless, systemic capacity, the quiet but decisive advantage that would shape the remainder of the conflict. By the time 1944 edged toward its close, the German prisoners had been immersed in American life long enough to notice subtler, almost invisible indicators of strength. Those details that could not be fully captured from a distance. It was no longer just vast fields, stocked warehouses, or efficient railroads that left them unsettled. It was the quiet, consistent functioning of society itself. Trucks departed on schedule, stores opened and closed with predictable reliability, and towns maintained civic order without visible stress or coercion. Children played in parks. Teenagers attended school and evening social gatherings, and community rituals unfolded undisturbed, even as war raged thousands of miles away. The absence of fear overhead, the constant, looming threat that had shaped daily life in Europe, was perhaps the most jarring. In Germany, sirens dictated behavior, blackouts shaped nights, and constant anxiety seeped into every routine. Here, the American sky remained wide and unconcerned, signaling a security and continuity that the prisoners could barely reconcile with their own expectations of society under global conflict. Their labor extended into every facet of domestic and wartime operations. Fields were harvested efficiently, processed foods packaged for domestic and overseas distribution. Timber fell for construction projects, and roads maintained with methodical precision, even in seemingly mundane tasks. The scale of operations was staggering. The prisoners noticed the interconnectedness of every system. Crops harvested in the Midwest-fed factories produced machinery for Europe. Railroads moved raw materials to processing centers. Ports loaded shipments bound across the Atlantic. Warehouses functioned as integral nodes in an immense logistical network. Each small observation, repeated day after day, reinforced the realization that America was not merely enduring war. It was systematizing it, expanding its capacity, and ensuring that supply, production, and civilian life moved forward without disruption. Conversations inside the barracks reflected a growing, collective unease. At first, prisoners speculated about hidden agendas or temporary strategies. Surely, they reasoned, this calm and abundance could not last. Perhaps shortages were concealed from view, or strict rationing would eventually expose the vulnerability of the system. Yet with each passing week, each day observing production lines, functioning towns, and orderly routines, the speculation grew quieter. Doubt began to replace certainty. Soldiers who had been trained to measure strength by divisions, tanks, and battlefield maneuvering now measured it in rail schedules, warehouse inventory, and the seamless movement of goods. The understanding dawned gradually. Total war was not determined solely on the front lines. Endurance, organization, and systemic capacity mattered as much, if not more. Exposure to American civilians further accelerated this shift. Women operating factories moved with confidence, contributing directly to industrial output while sustaining their own households. Farmers managed vast fields with minimal external oversight. Young workers and teenagers engaged in schooling, chores, and labor simultaneously, demonstrating a level of coordination previously unimagined by the soldiers. Even ordinary commercial interactions, shops stocking shelves, bakeries displaying fresh bread, trucks arriving on time, communicated a society operating not by improvisation, but by deliberate design. Prisoners gradually recognized that the ordinary, mundane rhythms of life were themselves acts of strategic endurance, vital to sustaining the broader machinery of war. This cumulative exposure did more than just challenge assumptions about American resilience. It began to dismantle long-held notions of ideological superiority. Soldiers who had once believed in the inevitable triumph of German ingenuity and discipline were confronted daily with evidence of an alternative form of strength. It was not flamboyant or aggressive. It was patient, consistent, and unrelenting. Each train arriving on time, each fully stocked warehouse, each calm town reinforced the quiet but powerful reality that endurance and systemic coordination could outweigh tactical brilliance on the battlefield. Ideological certainty, previously absolute, began to soften in the presence of sustained contradiction. As the prisoners settled into this new reality, they also began to observe the subtle ways in which American society maintained a balance between civilian life and wartime demands. Resources were allocated efficiently. Shortages existed, but they were managed without panic. The presence of civilians working alongside soldiers in factories, on farms, and in public services demonstrated a society that had not only adapted to war, but had organized itself to thrive under it. The prisoners recognized a fundamental difference. In Europe, adaptation had been reactive, forced by destruction and scarcity. In America, adaptation appeared proactive, planned, and scalable. Factories expanded outward. Fields were cultivated systematically, and transport networks functioned without interruption. The contrast was striking, and the psychological impact profound. In quiet moments, the prisoners reflected on these differences. They recalled Europe, where every raid, blackout, and shortage had shaped life with relentless pressure. Here, there was calm. Life continued. Society functioned. And this functioning, observed daily, revealed a depth of strategic capacity that few had anticipated. The war, they realized, was being waged not only through courage or technology, but through the systematic, patient management of resources, people, and time. The capacity to endure, to maintain normalcy, and coordinate vast operations across territory and society had emerged as an invisible but decisive weapon. Even routine interactions emphasized this realization. Guarded work assignments placed prisoners alongside American workers, who carried out tasks with quiet skill and without fanfare. Supervisors communicated clearly. Schedules were predictable, and efficiency was expected but not forced through coercion. Each day reinforced the understanding that order, continuity, and systemic capacity were as powerful as any artillery or tank. The prisoners gradually internalized this lesson, and it reshaped their perspective on war itself. Victory was not merely a product of immediate tactical action. It was inseparable from the ability to sustain production, maintain civilian and military order, and manage time as a strategic resource. As 1945 arrived, the cumulative weight of what the German prisoners had witnessed became undeniable. The patterns of production, the order of towns, the calm efficiency of civilian life, and predictable routines of the camps had combined into a revelation they could not ignore. It was no longer speculation, no longer rumor. It was lived experience. They had seen a society that was not only surviving global war, but thriving within it, maintaining both civilian normalcy and military capacity at a scale previously unimaginable. The American system had revealed itself as patient, organized, and resilient, qualities that could not be overcome by courage alone. And yet, the full impact of this realization was deeply personal. For men who had grown up believing in the unassailable superiority of German engineering, discipline, and tactics, the slow unfolding of American efficiency produced an internal reckoning, a quiet but profound transformation in understanding the nature of conflict, endurance, and power. The final months of captivity solidified this awareness. Work assignments, though still under armed supervision, expanded into more sophisticated industrial tasks, giving prisoners further insight into the inner workings of the wartime economy. Some labored in food processing and canning plants, others in lumber yards or construction projects, and a few assisted with logistical support for military transport. Every activity reinforced a lesson they had been absorbing for months. Victory in modern war depended on the seamless functioning of complex systems, the endurance of labor, and the coordination of society itself. It was a lesson delivered without speeches, propaganda, or overt instruction. It was learned quietly, through observation, repetition, and exposure to the ordinary tasks that, when multiplied across a nation, became extraordinary indicators of national capacity. When news of Germany's surrender finally reached the camps, it arrived quietly, carried through radio broadcasts and word of mouth. There was no triumph, no dramatic announcement to mark the moment. It was a factual statement that shifted the prisoners' understanding of the world. Some reacted with disbelief, others with relief, but many experienced a profound confirmation of what they had already begun to understand. The war, they realized, had been decided not solely on the front lines, but in the fields, factories, towns, and logistical networks they had observed from within the United States. Courage, discipline, and technology remained important, but they were only one part of a larger equation in which endurance, organization, and systemic capacity held decisive power. The journey home was slow and often harrowing. Railways, roads, and bridges had been destroyed across Europe, and many towns were unrecognizable from the soldiers' memories. Cities lay in ruins, streets were littered with rubble, and homes had been reduced to skeletons of brick and ash. Soldiers walked for weeks, navigating landscapes transformed by relentless conflict. For those returning to Germany, the contrast with the America they had seen months earlier was striking and disorienting. Whereas the United States had appeared stable, organized, and abundant, post-war Germany offered devastation, scarcity, and the immense task of reconstruction. Families had aged or moved, children had grown, and entire communities had been altered or destroyed. Survival became an immediate concern, but the psychological weight of what they had witnessed in America lingered. The prisoners had observed not only an enemy's capacity, but also profound structural advantages that could shape the course of history. By late 1944, the cumulative effect of these observations had begun to crystallize into a deeper internal reckoning. The soldiers confronted a reality that propaganda had never prepared them for. The enemy was not only strong but organized, patient, and capable of sustaining effort over time. They began to measure American strength in new ways, considering the seamless flow of supplies, the steady rhythm of civilian life, and the ability to maintain operations across thousands of miles. The war's outcome, they realized, might be determined long before opposing armies engage in combat, dictated instead by the quiet, persistent, and unyielding capacity to endure and expand. Even as the front line shifted in Europe and Germany faced mounting pressure, the prisoners' understanding of American endurance became personal and internal. They had witnessed a society capable of sustaining normal life while waging a global war, a society whose strength was not ostentatious but structural. The evidence was everywhere. Abundant fields, functioning factories, steady rail lines, stocked warehouses, and towns that continued their routines without visible strain. This realization was gradual, almost imperceptible, but profound. Ideological certainty softened, assumptions eroded, and the soldiers began to recognize that endurance, capacity, and systemic organization were decisive forces in modern warfare, forces they had never fully appreciated while fighting on the front lines of Europe. Even as life resumed amidst the rubble, memory remained relentless. Stories from liberated camps, photographs, and recovered documents gradually revealed the broader reality of the conflict. Atrocities, crimes against humanity, and the enormity of human suffering emerged clearly. The prisoners, once trained to unquestioningly obey orders and to equate loyalty with strength, were confronted with the moral consequences of war. Obedience alone did not absolve responsibility. Ideological certainty, once a cornerstone of identity, fractured under the weight of truth. For some, these realizations remained private, haunting their thoughts in quiet moments. Others confronted the past directly, struggling to reconcile loyalty to their homeland with awareness of the suffering caused in pursuit of that loyalty. The internal reckoning for these men extended far beyond physical survival. It became a moral and psychological journey, one that could not be hurried or avoided. They had been witness to extraordinary organizational capacity, to a society capable of sustaining war while maintaining daily life, and to the delicate interplay between civilian normalcy and military power. These lessons contrasted sharply with their own experiences of destruction, rationing, and adaptation under pressure. And yet, the insight gained from exposure to American efficiency, patience, and coordination offer a framework for understanding modern warfare that transcended ideology or nationality. Endurance, Systemic organization and the ability to maintain continuity in the face of global conflict had emerged as decisive factors, shaping the outcomes of battles in nations alike. As Europe slowly reconstructed itself, brick by brick, policy by policy, the shadow of experience remained. Children played in bomb craters, schools reopened in half-destroyed buildings, and economies began the slow work of recovery. Public life appeared to resume its rhythm, but private awareness of the lessons learned in captivity endured. Soldiers and civilians alike carried the knowledge that war extended far beyond the front lines. The quiet efficiency of the United States, the patient coordination of industry and labor, and the resilience of society under strain had illustrated a reality that could not be ignored. Victory was inseparable from the capacity to endure, to sustain, and organize at scale. For many former prisoners, the war's consequences persisted far longer than the cessation of fighting. Memory, reflection, and moral awareness became part of daily life. The internal reckoning was subtle, cumulative, and enduring. It was evident in conversations, in the assessment of post-war reconstruction, and in the recognition that ordinary individuals could become participants in extraordinary destruction. It was evident in the understanding that belief, obedience, and loyalty could both enable and conceal immense suffering. And it was evident in the quiet but persistent acknowledgement that societies capable of sustaining production, order, and resilience had an enduring advantage in the conduct of war. Ultimately, the experience of German prisoners in the United States during the Second World War was a profound lesson in the nature of modern conflict. It revealed that courage, technology, and tactical skill, while vital, were insufficient alone to secure victory. Endurance, organization, and systemic capacity, less visible, slower to manifest, but equally decisive, were forces capable of shaping outcomes before armies ever met on the battlefield. The prisoners' observations of American life, labor, and infrastructure provided not only a new understanding of the enemy, but also a deep reflection on the mechanics of total war, the moral dimensions of obedience, and a complex relationship between human resilience and national capacity. By the time the prisoners returned to a devastated Europe, the lessons of captivity remained. Homecomings were quiet, uncertain, and fraught with the physical and psychological realities of destruction. Yet the knowledge of what had been witnessed, the patient, organized, and relentless capacity of an opponent, shaped their understanding of history, conflict, and the human condition. The war had begun with certainty and ideological conviction, and ended with questions that would persist for decades. Duty, responsibility, morality, and endurance had emerged as the true arbiters of modern conflict. And for those who had lived through captivity, the long shadow of understanding would remain, a quiet but enduring testament to the power of resilience, organization, and the invisible structures that determine the fate of nations.